How did our universe come into existence? The atheists will say that initially there was one primary nebula. Our whole universe was one primary nebula. Then there was a secondary separation. There was a Big Bang, which gave rise to galaxies, the stars, the planets, the sun, the moon, and the earth on which we live. When you ask this atheist, that when did you come to know about this? So he will tell you, this was first told and discovered by a couple of scientists in the early part of 1970s, for which they got the Nobel Prize. About 40 years back, there were a group of scientists who told the world how did the universe come into existence, and they called it the Big Bang. I will tell the atheists, what you say you have come to know 40 years back, and what you call the Big Bang, is already mentioned in the book which I read, the glorious Quran. It's mentioned 1400 years ago in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 30, which says, Avalam yaral lazina kafaru. Do not the unbelievers see anna samawati wal arda kanat ratkan fasaknahuma, that the heaven and the earth were joined together and we clove them asunder. What you're talking about, the Big Bang, the creation of the universe, which you came to know 40 years back, is already mentioned in this book, the glorious Quran, 1400 years ago. Who could have mentioned that in the Quran? So the atheists will say, maybe someone wrote, maybe it's a fluke, maybe it's a guesswork. No problem. Don't argue with him. Continue. You ask the atheist that the light of the moon, is it its own light or its reflected light? So the atheist will tell you that previously we human beings thought the light of the moon was its own light. Recently, 200 years back, 300 years back, we came to know that the light of the moon is not its own light, but it's a reflected light. I will tell him that what you came to know recently, 200, 300 years back, is already mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago. The Quran says in Surah Furqan, chapter number 25, verse number 61, that blessed is he who has made the constellations in the sky, placed therein sun having its own light, and the moon having reflected or borrowed light. The Quran refers to the sun as Shams, and his light is always described as Siraj, Wahaj or Diya, meaning a blazing torch, a lamp or a shining glory. And the sun is referred in the Quran as Qamar, and its light is always described as Munir or Nur, meaning borrowed light or reflected light. And this message, besides Surah Furqan, chapter 25, verse number 61, is also mentioned in Surah Yunus, chapter number 10, verse number 5, as well as Surah Nahl, chapter number 16, verse 16, and in Surah Nuh, chapter 71, verse number 15 and 16, that the light of the moon is a borrowed light or reflected light. Who could have mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago that the light of the moon is not its own light, but it's a reflected or borrowed light? So the atheist will give a pause, but may say, maybe, your Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, maybe you're super intelligent. Don't argue. Continue. I will tell the atheist that when I was in school, I passed my standard 10 in 1982. I had learned in science and in geography that the sun, it revolved in the universe, but it did not rotate about its own axis. The atheist will say, is this what is mentioned in the Quran? That the sun does not rotate about the axis? I said, no. This is what I learned in school in 1982. About 28 years back, when I was in school, I learned in school that the sun, though it revolved in the universe, it did not rotate about its own axis. But Quran says in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 33, Huwa allazi khalaqa al-layla wan-nahara. It is he who has created the night and the day. Wash-shamsa wal-qamar, the sun and the moon. Kullun fi falaki yasbahun, each one traveling in orbit with its own motion. The Arabic word used here is yasbahun, derived from Arabic word sabaha, which describes the motion of a moving body. When I use this word yasbahun or sabaha for a person who is on the floor, it will not mean he is rolling on the floor. It will mean he is either walking or running on the floor. If I use it for a person in water, it will not mean he is floating. It will mean he is swimming. Similarly, when the Quran mentions this word for a celestial body, it will not mean it is flying in the air. It will mean it is moving while it is rotating about its own axis. So Quran says the sun and the moon, besides revolving, it also rotates about its own axis. And today, with the special equipment, you can have the image of the sun on a tabletop, and we see that the sun has got black spots. And it takes approximately 25 days for these black spots to complete one rotation, indicating that the sun takes about 25 days to complete one rotation. And today, if you go to school, you will find that this thing has been incorporated in the school textbooks. That the sun is not stationary, it rotates about its own axis. So what you came to know 30 years back, 40 years back, is mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago. Who could have mentioned this in the Quran? That the sun rotates about its own axis? And the atheist will be silent. Don't wait for his answer, you continue. Today science tells us that the sunlight we have is due to a chemical reaction taking place. And this is taking place in billions of years. And one day, this chemical reaction will stop. And the sun will cease to exist, and so will life on the face of the earth. But the scientists say this will take another couple of billion years. This is what the scientists discovered a couple of hundred years before. Quran mentioned 1400 years ago in Surah Yasin, chapter number 36, verse number 38. وَالشَّمْسَ تَجْرِي لِمُسْتَقَرٍ لَهَا. That the sun is running its course for a period determined, for a term determined, to a place determined. Today science tells us that one day the sun will extinguish and it will stop. That means it is there for a particular period. Science also tells us that the sun, along with the solar system, it is moving to a point in the universe which is called as Herculean, called as Alpha Lyra, at the speed of 12 miles per second to a point which is called as solar apex. So the Quran says the sun is there for a period determined and moving to a point determined. And today science tells the same thing. What science tells us today, Quran has mentioned 1400 years ago. Who could have mentioned this in the Quran? The atheist will be silent. Don't wait for his reply. You can continue. Today science tells us that the atmosphere that we have above the earth, it prevents the harmful radiation from entering into the earth. If this atmosphere, the sky, wouldn't have been there, the ultraviolet rays and the X-rays would have entered, and life would not be sustainable on the face of the earth. It is due to this atmospheric layer, the sky, which gives sustenance to life. Quran says in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 32, that is He who has created the sky as a protected ceiling, as a protected canopy. Quran says that the sky, the atmosphere, is a protected ceiling, which science has discovered recently. 50 years back, 100 years back, Quran mentioned this 1400 years